The smell of burning flesh and ozone still fills my nostrils when I remember that day outside Alesia, when thunder fell from a clear sky and shook the very foundations of the Republic. My name is Marcus Flavius Maximus, Centurion of the 10th Legion, and I have served Caesar for 12 campaigns across Gaul. I thought I understood war, the clash of gladius against shield, the screams of dying men, the taste of victory bought with Roman blood. You think that makes me a simple soldier, but you don't know what I witnessed in that crater where something impossible had fallen from the heavens. The real terror isn't the barbarian tribes with their crude weapons and painted faces. It's the giants that fall from the stars. Speaking of gods we've never heard of, carrying weapons that make our finest steel look like children's toys. When the sky bleeds fire and armored titans walk among mortal men, that's when you realize the world is far stranger and more dangerous than any Roman ever imagined. Chapter 1. The Legends March. The morning mist clung to the Gallic hills like the breath of dying gods as our column wound its way through the valleys north of Alesia. 50,000 legionaries marched in perfect formation, their hobnailed sandals beating out the rhythm that had conquered half the known world. The eagle standards gleamed in the pale sunlight, bronze and gold catching the light like captured flames. I rode at the head of my century, 120 men of the 10th Legion, Caesar's most trusted veterans. We had fought together from the Rhine to the Atlantic, from the forests of Germania to the shores of Britannia. These were soldiers who had seen the impossible made routine through Roman discipline and engineering. Centurion, called Optio Gaius Brutus from behind me, his voice carrying the rough authority of a man who had risen through the ranks. Scouts report unusual activity 3 miles northeast. Something fell from the sky during the night watch. I raised my hand, and the sentry came to a halt with the precision that marked elite troops. In the distance, I could see Caesar's crimson cloak as he conferred with his staff officers. The general had been unusually tense since leaving winter quarters, as if he sensed something beyond the normal challenges of campaigning in hostile territory. "Describe unusual," I commanded, though part of me already dreaded the answer. 20 years of soldiering had taught me that unusual events in barbarian lands were rarely good news for Roman forces. "The scouts speak of a crater, sir, larger than a ballista could make. The earth around it is strange, like glass, but black as a moonless night, and there are sounds coming from within." "What kind of sounds?" "Mechanical, sir, like the great siege engines, but different, more complex." I considered the options available to a Roman officer faced with unknown phenomena. Standard procedure would be to report to higher command and request orders. But Caesar valued initiative in his centurions, and curiosity about potential threats was part of what had made the legions so effective. "Detail 2 squads for investigation," I ordered. "Full armor, weapons ready. If this is some new barbarian trick, I want to know before it threatens the column." The selected legionaries formed up with the automatic precision that came from years of training. Each man carried a gladius, a pilum, and a scutum reinforced with bronze bosses. Their lorica segmentata gleamed like scales in the morning light, overlapping steel plates that could turn aside most weapons the barbarians possessed. We made our way through the forest with the careful advance of professional soldiers in hostile territory. The trees here were ancient oaks and ash, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dancing patterns. But as we approached the scouts' coordinates, I noticed something that made my skin crawl with unease. The forest was silent. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the very air was reluctant to move through this space. "There, sir," whispered Legionary Marcus Quintus, pointing through the trees toward a clearing ahead. "You can see the edge of it." What I saw defied immediate comprehension. The crater was indeed massive, perhaps 50 paces across and twice as deep. But Brutus had been wrong about one detail. The earth around it wasn't like glass. It was glass, fused by heat so intense it had turned soil and stone into smooth black surfaces. that reflected our faces like dark mirrors. "By Jupiter's beard," muttered one of the younger soldiers. "What could do this?" I had no answer. In 20 years of military service, I had seen Greek fire, siege engines that could reduce walls to rubble, and alchemical compounds that burned even when submerged in water. But nothing in the Roman arsenal could create this level of destruction, and I had never heard of barbarian weapons capable of such devastation. The mechanical sounds Brutus had mentioned were clearer now. A rhythmic pulsing that seemed to come from the center of the crater, accompanied by occasional sharp cracks like breaking stone. But underneath those sounds was something else, a low humming that seemed to resonate in my bones. "Maintain formation," I ordered quietly. "Shields up, peeler ready. Whatever's down there, we approach as soldiers, not gawking civilians." We descended into the crater, using the natural slope on the eastern side, our hobnailed sandals finding purchase on the glass-smooth surface with difficulty. The humming grew louder as we approached the bottom, and I could see now that the mechanical sounds were coming from something embedded in the crater's center. It was a structure of some kind, though unlike anything in Roman architecture or barbarian construction. Smooth curves of metal, or something that looked like metal, formed geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The surface was a dark blue-grey that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and along its edges, symbols glowed with an inner fire that reminded me uncomfortably of the sacred flames in the Temple of Vesta. "Centurion," one of my men called out, his voice tight with controlled fear. "Something's happening." The humming intensified, rising in pitch until it became almost unbearable. The glowing symbols began to pulse in sequence, as if responding to our presence. And then, with a sound like thunder contained in a bronze amphora, a section of the structure split open like a flower blooming in reverse. Steam hissed out of the opening, carrying scents I couldn't identify. Ozone and heated metal, but also something organic that reminded me of incense burned in temples dedicated to foreign gods. The steam cleared, revealing an interior that glowed with the same unnatural light as the external symbols. And then something stepped out. At first, my mind refused to process what I was seeing. It was humanoid in basic shape, but enormous, easily 8 feet tall and proportionally massive. What I had initially taken for elaborate armor revealed itself to be something far more complex. Overlapping plates of some material that wasn't quite metal, wasn't quite stone, but combined the best properties of both. The figure's head was enclosed in a helmet that covered every feature, with glowing lenses where eyes should be. But it was the sheer presence of the thing that nearly broke my nerve. Even motionless, it radiated power and authority that made Caesar himself seem like a village magistrate by comparison. "Hold position," I barked to my men, though I could see several of them backing away despite their training. "Shields locked, peeler at ready. We are Roman legionaries, and we do not flee from anything that walks on 2 legs." The giant turned its helmeted head toward us, those glowing lenses fixing on our formation with unsettling intensity. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that seemed to come from inside my skull rather than through my ears. "Primitives," it said in perfect Latin, though the accent was unlike anything I had ever heard. "You speak the tongue of terror, though this is clearly not the age of unity. What year do you mark by your calendar?" The question was so unexpected that I found myself answering before strategic caution could intervene. "It is the 704th year since the founding of Rome, giant, and you will identify yourself to soldiers of the Republic." The helmeted head tilted slightly, as if the creature was processing information that surprised it. 704 years since the founding of Rome. By the throne I have traveled further than calculated. It took a step toward us, and I heard several of my men invoke various gods for protection. The giant moved with impossible grace for something so massive, each step calculated and precise. But there was something in its posture that suggested weariness rather than aggression. "I am Brother-Sergeant Lucius Varro of the Ultramarines Legion," it announced, and though the words meant nothing to me, They carried the weight of absolute authority. 5th Company, 2nd Tactical Squad. And if your dating system is accurate, I am approximately 38,000 years displaced from my proper temporal coordinates. The implications of what it was saying washed over me like cold water. 38,000 years. The creature was claiming to come from a time so distant that it made the founding of Rome seem like yesterday's sunrise. That's impossible, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I was looking at evidence that impossibility was apparently relative. Many things are impossible, mortal, the giant replied. Yet they occur nonetheless. My vessel was caught in a temporal anomaly while transitioning through the warp. I appear to have emerged in your primitive era rather than my intended destination. Your vessel? The drop pod behind me. The giant gestured toward the structure from which it had emerged. A single-occupancy transport designed for combat insertion, though I suspect its machine spirit has been damaged beyond repair by the temporal displacement. I had no idea what a machine spirit was, but the giant's casual reference to time travel and impossible technologies was beginning to affect my men's morale. Several were making the sign against evil, and I could see doubt creeping into eyes that had faced Germanic berserkers and British war chariots without flinching. You claim to come from the future, I said, trying to maintain some semblance of interrogational authority. Prove it. The giant's response was to raise one massive arm and point at something behind our formation. I turned to see a pillar of smoke rising from the direction of our main column, accompanied by the distant sound of horns signaling an attack. Your forces are under assault by a barbarian warband approximately 800 strong, the giant said with mechanical certainty. They are using the traditional Celtic tactic of massed charge following initial missile bombardment. Your casualties will be minimal if standard Roman tactical doctrine is followed, but the engagement will last approximately 47 minutes. Before I could ask how it could possibly know this, a legionary came crashing through the underbrush, his armor bloodied and his face pale with exertion. "Centurion!" he gasped. "Barbarian attack on the main column. Caesar orders all detached units to return immediately." I looked at the giant, whose glowing lenses seemed to be focused on something far beyond our immediate surroundings. There was an air of calculation about it, as if it was processing vast amounts of information and reaching conclusions based on data I couldn't even perceive. "You knew," I said. It wasn't a question. "I calculated the probability based on tactical assessment of local conditions," the giant replied. "Barbarian forces in this region typically use terrain advantages for ambush tactics. The timing was predictable. And you let it happen. I am not currently in a position to intervene effectively. My equipment is damaged, my communications are offline, and I lack sufficient intelligence about local political and military situations to take appropriate action." The practical tone of its voice was somehow more disturbing than if it had ranted about supernatural powers or divine mandate. This creature spoke like a professional soldier making tactical assessments, but on a scale that encompassed decades and continents. "Orders, sir?" asked Brutus, though his eyes never left the giant. I had approximately 30 seconds to make a decision that could affect the course of Roman history. Leave the giant here and return to battle, as duty demanded. Try to capture it for Caesar's examination, or attempt to gain its cooperation through negotiation. "Brother-Sergeant Lucius Varro," I said, testing the unfamiliar name. "Will you come with us? Caesar would be interested in meeting someone from 38,000 years in the future." The giant was silent for a moment, its helmeted head turning toward the sounds of battle in the distance. When it spoke, there was something almost human in its tone. "I am a servant of the Emperor of mankind," it said. "And if I am truly displaced to this era, then that service requires me to ensure the survival of the civilization that will eventually give rise to the Imperium. Yes, Roman, I will come with you to meet your Caesar." As we began climbing out of the crater, the giant's massive form moving with surprising agility, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just set events in motion that would echo through the centuries. Behind us, the damaged drop pod continued its mechanical humming, a sound that seemed to carry whispers of futures that might never come to pass. The barbarian attack was still raging when we emerged from the forest, but now we were returning with an ally whose capabilities I couldn't begin to assess. Whatever the consequences, the 10th Legion was about to learn that the world was far stranger than any Roman had ever imagined, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered that perhaps that was exactly what was supposed to happen. Chapter 2. Contact with the impossible. The sounds of battle grew louder as we approached the main column, the clash of steel on steel, the splintering of wooden shields, and the distinctly Roman shouts of centurions maintaining formation discipline under pressure. But what dominated my attention was the rhythmic thunder of the giant's footsteps as it moved through the forest with mechanical precision. Brother-Sergeant Lucius Varro, if that was truly its name, had not spoken during our rapid march back to the Legion. It simply followed our pace with an economy of movement that suggested vast reserves of endurance. Occasionally, its helmeted head would turn to scan the surrounding terrain, and I noticed that its massive hands never strayed far from weapons that I was beginning to suspect could level a city. "Sir," Brutus whispered as we crested the final hill overlooking the battle. "How do we explain that?" He gestured toward the giant. It was a valid question that I had been avoiding. Roman military protocols had procedures for dealing with prisoners, allies, barbarian chieftains, and foreign dignitaries. They had no procedures for introducing a time-traveling warrior from the distant future to a commanding general in the middle of an active engagement. "We tell the truth," I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. "Caesar values accurate intelligence above comfortable lies." Below us, the battle was proceeding exactly as the giant had predicted. Celtic warriors had charged the Roman line in a mass assault designed to break through by sheer weight of numbers and ferocity. But the Legion was responding with textbook defensive tactics. Locked shields, coordinated pylon volleys, and methodical gladius work that turned barbarian courage into organized slaughter. 43 minutes remaining, the giant observed quietly. "The barbarian charge will break against your shield wall in approximately 8 minutes. Their secondary assault will focus on your left flank, where the ground offers better footing for mounted warriors." I stared at it, trying to understand how anyone could predict battle outcomes with such specificity. Even Caesar, who was acknowledged as one of history's great tactical minds, spoke in terms of probabilities and contingencies when planning engagements. "How can you possibly know that? Pattern recognition based on tactical analysis," it replied matter-of-factly. "Barbarian tribes in this region employ similar strategies across multiple campaigns. Your legions respond with standardized defensive doctrines. The mathematics are predictable. Mathematics, logistics, terrain advantage, morale factors, equipment superiority, training differential, command structure efficiency." The giant listed variables as if reading from a military manual. When sufficient data is available, battle outcomes become probability calculations rather than uncertain events. I realized I was getting a glimpse of how this creature's mind operated. Like a vast calculating engine that could process tactical information faster and more completely than any human commander. It was simultaneously fascinating and deeply unsettling. "Movement on the left flank," reported one of my legionaries. "Mounted barbarians," just as it said. Sure enough, Celtic cavalry was beginning to circle toward our weakest position, exactly where the giant had predicted. I watched Caesar's staff react to the development, sending runners to reposition reserves and strengthen the threatened section. "Your Caesar adapts quickly," the giant observed. "Good tactical instincts for a primitive commander." Primitive? I couldn't keep the indignation out of my voice. Caesar has conquered more territory than any general in Roman history, and that is commendable for this technological and organizational level, the giant replied without apparent awareness that it had given offense. "In my era, planetary conquests are routine. Caesar's achievements, while impressive for your time period, represent basic competency for an imperial guard colonel." The casual dismissal of Caesar's genius stung, but but I was beginning to understand that the giant's perspective operated on scales that made human achievements seem insignificant. If it truly came from 38,000 years in the future, then even the greatest Roman accomplishments would seem primitive by comparison. "Sir," Brutus interrupted, "should we join the battle? The left flank is beginning to buckle." I looked at the giant, whose glowing lenses were tracking the cavalry charge with mechanical precision. "Brother-Sergeant, can you assist?" "Negative. My bolter ammunition is depleted, my Vox systems are non-functional, and I lack proper intelligence on the strategic situation. Intervention without adequate briefing could compromise long-term objectives." "Men are dying," I pointed out. "Men always die in warfare. The question is whether their deaths serve meaningful strategic purposes." The giant's tone carried no emotion, just clinical assessment. Random intervention in historical events could create temporal paradoxes, with consequences far worse than the immediate tactical situation. I found myself caught between the immediate human impulse to help fellow soldiers and the larger implications of what the giant was suggesting. If it truly came from the future, then perhaps events were supposed to unfold in specific ways. But philosophical considerations vanished as I saw Celtic cavalry break through our left flank and begin rolling up the line. Roman discipline was holding, but barely, and I could see gaps opening in the formation as casualties mounted. "Damn the consequences," I muttered, drawing my gladius. "10th Legion, advance! We support the left flank." My century moved down the hill in battle formation, shields locked and pila ready for close combat. I expected the giant to remain behind, but to my surprise, it began following us with ground-eating strides that quickly brought it alongside our advance. "Brother-Sergeant," I called out without breaking pace. "I thought you said intervention was inadvisable." "It is. However, I also calculate that allowing a Roman centurion to die in a minor skirmish could have more significant temporal consequences than limited combat assistance." "Why?" "Unknown. But probability analysis suggests that your survival may be important to future events." The giant's casual mention of my personal importance to history was both flattering and terrifying, but there was no time for further discussion. We had reached the edge of the battle, and Celtic warriors were beginning to notice our approach. What happened next redefined my understanding of what was possible in warfare. The giant moved with impossible speed for something so massive, covering ground faster than a cavalry horse despite moving on foot. Its first opponent, a Celtic warrior mounted on a war pony, barely had time to register the giant's approach before a massive hand closed around his spear shaft and snapped it like a twig. The second barbarian fared no better. The giant's other hand caught him around the torso and lifted him from his mount with casual ease, then flung him 20 feet into a group of his companions with enough force to knock them all down. But it was the giant's third action that truly stunned me. It drew what I had taken to be a sword from its back, but the weapon that emerged was like nothing I had ever seen. Twice the length of a gladius and broad as a man's hand, it hummed with the same unnatural energy that powered the giant's armor. When the blade struck a Celtic shield, it didn't just cut through the wood and leather, it vaporized them, leaving nothing but smoke and ash. "By all the gods," whispered one of my legionaries. "What is that thing?" I had no answer. The giant moved through the barbarian ranks like a force of nature, its impossible blade cutting down enemies with surgical precision. But what impressed me most was its restraint. Despite wielding power that could have slaughtered dozens of men in seconds, it targeted only those barbarians who directly threatened Roman soldiers. The psychological effect on the Celtic warriors was immediate and decisive. Men who had charged Roman shields with berserker fury broke and ran when faced with something that fought like a god of war made manifest. Within minutes, the entire barbarian assault collapsed into panicked retreat. "Engagement concluded," the giant announced as it deactivated its weapon and returned it to its back. Barbarian forces routed. Roman casualties, 17 dead, 43 wounded, all within acceptable parameters. Acceptable parameters? I stared at the giant in disbelief. Those were my men. And their sacrifice secured victory with minimal strategic cost, the giant replied with the same emotionless tone it had used throughout the battle. In my era, such casualty ratios would be considered exemplary. I was beginning to understand that arguing morality with a creature that measured death in statistical terms would be futile. Whatever the giant was, it operated according to principles that were simultaneously more and less than human. "Centurion Maximus!" Caesar's voice cut across the battlefield like a blade. The general was approaching at a full gallop, his staff officers struggling to keep pace. But as he drew closer, I saw his expression change from satisfaction at victory to something approaching shock as he noticed my companion. Caesar brought his mount to a halt 20 paces away, his legendary composure intact despite the impossible sight before him. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority that had conquered Gaul and made him the most powerful man in the Republic. "Centurion, you will explain how you came to be accompanied by that." "General," I replied, snapping to attention. "May I present Brother-Sergeant Lucius Varro of the Ultramarines Legion? He claims to come from approximately 38,000 years in the future and has proven useful in the recent engagement." Caesar's eyes narrowed as he studied the giant with the calculating gaze of a man accustomed to evaluating potential threats and opportunities. "It speaks Latin." "Perfectly, General. And it predicted the barbarian attack with complete accuracy." "Interesting." Caesar dismounted and walked closer, showing the kind of personal courage that had made him legendary among his soldiers. "Brother-Sergeant Lucius Varro, if that is indeed your name, you will explain your presence in my territory." The giant's helmeted head inclined slightly in what might have been a gesture of respect. "General Gaius Julius Caesar, your reputation precedes you, even in my era. I am here as a result of temporal displacement, an accident during warp translation that has deposited me in your time period rather than my intended destination." Warp translation. Travel through a parallel dimension that allows faster-than-light movement between star systems. The technology will not be developed by humanity for approximately 27,000 years. Caesar absorbed this information with the same calm he brought to intelligence reports about barbarian troop movements. "And you serve in an army of such beings?" "I am a space marine of the Adeptus Astartes," the giant replied. "A genetically enhanced warrior in service to the Emperor of mankind. My purpose is to protect humanity and expand the Imperium across the galaxy." The galaxy. Yes, in my time, humanity controls approximately 1 million worlds across the galaxy, locked in eternal war against alien species, heretical cults, and demonic incursions from alternate dimensions. I watched Caesar process these revelations with fascination. Any other Roman general would have either fled in terror or ordered immediate execution of something so obviously supernatural. But Caesar was approaching this impossible situation with the same methodical intelligence he brought to political maneuvering in the Senate. "You fought with considerable skill," Caesar observed. "Your weapon is unknown to me." "A chainsword, standard close combat equipment for Adeptus Astartes forces. The blade contains molecular cutting edges powered by an internal engine. And you used it to aid Roman soldiers. Why?" For the first time since I had met it, the giant seemed to pause before answering. When it spoke, there was something almost human in its tone. "Because in my time, Caesar, you are remembered as one of the great leaders in human history. Your conquests and governmental innovations laid foundations that eventually led to the Imperium that I serve. Ensuring your success may be essential to preserving the future I am sworn to protect." The implications of what the giant was saying hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just claiming to come from the future, it was suggesting that Caesar's actions in our time would directly influence events 38,000 years hence. Caesar, however, seemed more intrigued than intimidated by this responsibility. "You would advise me then? Share knowledge of future events to ensure proper outcomes?" "Negative," the giant replied immediately. "Excessive intervention in historical events could create paradoxes that prevent the future I represent from occurring. My presence here is already a significant temporal contamination. Further interference must be minimal and carefully calculated. But you will remain with us. For the immediate term, yes, my equipment is damaged beyond my ability to repair with available resources, until I can determine a method of returning to my proper temporal coordinates. I am stranded. Caesar smiled, and I recognized the expression of a man who had just been presented with an unprecedented opportunity. Then you will serve as an advisor to the Legion. Your knowledge of strategy and warfare could prove useful. I serve the Emperor of Mankind, the giant said formally, but the Emperor's will encompasses the protection of humanity throughout history. I will provide counsel where appropriate. As I watched the two figures, one of history's greatest military minds and one of the future's enhanced warriors, reach an understanding, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was witnessing a moment that would echo through the centuries. The barbarians were defeated, but somehow I sensed that the real battle was just beginning. Chapter 3: The Emperor's Revelation. 3 days later, I stood outside Caesar's command tent as heated voices carried through the leather walls. The giant, Lucius Varro, had been quartered with the Legion's engineers, where its knowledge of impossible technologies had already begun causing significant disruption to normal military routine. Absolutely refuse to accept that Rome will fall. Caesar's voice carried the anger of a man confronting unacceptable possibilities. The Republic is eternal. Our laws, our culture, our very way of life will endure until the end of time. With respect, General, came the giant's measured reply. The historical record indicates otherwise. The Republic will transform into an empire under Augustus Caesar. That empire will endure for approximately 1,000 years before fragmenting into successor states. Eventually, all traces of classical Roman civilization will be forgotten except in archived records. I winced at the giant's tactless delivery of what had to be devastating news for any Roman leader. For 3 days, Caesar had been interrogating his impossible advisor about future history, and each revelation seemed to cut deeper than the last. But Caesar's voice dropped to a more controlled tone. You also said that Rome's influence endures, that somehow our achievements contribute to this imperium you serve. Correct. Roman concepts of law, administration, and military organization provided foundational principles for the institutions that will eventually unite humanity under the emperor's banner. Your conquests and governmental innovations are essential stepping stones toward that ultimate achievement. I had heard variations of this conversation for 3 consecutive nights, as Caesar struggled to understand how his life's work could be both ultimately doomed and fundamentally important. The giant's explanations were logically consistent, but emotionally crushing for a man who believed in Roman destiny. Tell me about this emperor you serve, Caesar commanded. You speak of him with reverence that borders on religious worship. The Emperor of Mankind is difficult to explain to someone from this era. The giant's voice carried a note of something approaching awe. He is a being of immense psychic power and scientific genius who has guided humanity from the shadows for thousands of years. When humanity finally achieves the stars, he will reveal himself and lead our species to dominance over the galaxy. The Emperor denies his divinity, though his capabilities far exceed anything your era would consider merely human. He commands powers that could reshape planets, possesses knowledge accumulated over 40,000 years of secret existence, and leads armies that could conquer star systems. There was a long pause before Caesar spoke again, his voice thoughtful. And you believe this being has existed throughout human history? That he walked among the pharaohs, the Greeks, perhaps even among Romans? The historical record is classified at my clearance level. But yes, General, the Emperor has guided humanity's development since before recorded history began. Every great leap forward, agriculture, writing, metallurgy, philosophy, has been influenced by his subtle intervention. If it spoke truly, then Caesar himself might be unwittingly serving the will of an immortal being who had been manipulating human civilization Since its inception. Has he walked among us? Caesar asked quietly. Does he know of our conversations? Unknown, but probability analysis suggests that an entity of the Emperor's capabilities would be aware of significant temporal anomalies, such as my presence in this era. Footsteps approached the tent entrance, and I quickly stepped back to avoid giving the appearance of eavesdropping. Caesar emerged a moment later, his expression troubled in a way I had rarely seen during even the most challenging campaigns. "Centurion," he said, noticing my presence. "Walk with me." We moved through the camp in comfortable military silence, past the evening cooking fires where legionaries were preparing their meals and discussing the day's march. But I could see that Caesar's thoughts were focused far beyond immediate concerns. "What do you make of our guest, Maximus?" Caesar asked finally. "It fights like a god and thinks like a philosopher, General. But it serves something larger than itself with absolute devotion." "Yes, that devotion troubles me." Caesar paused beside the camp's perimeter, looking out at the Gallic countryside. "I have commanded men for 20 years, and I recognize the fanaticism of true belief when I encounter it. This Lucius Varro would die for his emperor without hesitation." "Is that necessarily concerning, sir? Roman soldiers die for the Republic without question. Roman soldiers die for Rome because they understand Rome. They know what they're defending, their families, their way of life, their gods. But this creature serves an entity it cannot adequately describe, for purposes it doesn't fully comprehend." I considered Caesar's observation. The giant had indeed shown remarkable reluctance to provide specific details about either the emperor or the imperium it served. Every answer seemed to raise more questions while revealing little concrete information. "Perhaps it cannot tell us more, General. You said yourself that knowledge of the future could be dangerous. Perhaps, or perhaps it doesn't know as much as it claims." Caesar's voice carried the skeptical tone of a politician accustomed to detecting deception. "Tell me, Centurion, in your observation, does our guest display any weaknesses? Any limitations we should be aware of?" The question caught me off guard. "Sir, are you considering the giant as a potential threat?" "I'm considering every possibility, as any competent commander should." Caesar's expression hardened. "This being could kill dozens of my best soldiers before we could bring it down. It possesses knowledge that could reshape human civilization. And it serves a master whose agenda may not align with Roman interests." I found myself caught between loyalty to Caesar and growing respect for the giant that had saved Roman lives in battle. "General, it has shown nothing but cooperation since joining us, for now. But what happens when its interests diverge from ours? What happens if this mysterious emperor decides that Caesar's success is less important than some other objective?" Before I could respond, alarm horns began sounding throughout the camp. We arrived to find the tent in controlled chaos, with tribunes and centurions reporting simultaneously while maps were unfurled and messengers dispatched. "General, we have a problem. Vercingetorix has arrived with the main Gallic army, 60,000 warriors, plus siege engines and cavalry." Caesar studied the tactical map with the rapid assessment that had made him legendary. "Numbers? Retreat and find different terrain, sir, or wait for reinforcements from the southern legions." Caesar was quiet for a moment, calculating possibilities. Then he spoke with the confidence that had carried him through a dozen seemingly impossible campaigns. "Sir," Antonius protested, "the tactical situation strongly favors the defenders. Casualties could be severe." "The tactical situation as you understand it," Caesar replied. "But we have assets that Vercingetorix cannot anticipate." As if summoned by the conversation, the giant ducked through the tent entrance. Its massive frame dominated the space, and I noticed that several of the staff officers instinctively stepped back from its imposing presence. "General," it said in its mechanical voice, "I have been monitoring your communications and analyzing the tactical situation. Do you require strategic assessment?" "Yes," Caesar replied immediately. "How would you assault a prepared position held by superior numbers?" The giant was silent for a moment, its glowing lenses seeming to process information at inhuman speeds. When it spoke, its tone carried absolute certainty. Direct assault would result in unacceptable casualty ratios. However, alternative approaches are available based on technological and tactical innovations not yet developed in this era. Explain. Night assault using coordinated infiltration by specialized units, followed by psychological warfare designed to break enemy morale before main engagement begins. Your legionaries possess the discipline necessary for complex night operations, but they lack the equipment modifications that would optimize effectiveness. Caesar leaned forward with interest. What modifications? Improved personal armor, enhanced weapons, modified tactical doctrine, adapted from Codex Astartes principles. The giant paused, as if considering the implications of what it was suggesting. I could provide technical specifications and training protocols that would significantly improve your force's combat effectiveness. In exchange for what? Nothing. My mission parameters include protecting human interests throughout the timeline. Ensuring Roman victory serves long-term strategic objectives. I watched Caesar weigh the offer with characteristic calculation. The giant was proposing to share military technology from the far future, knowledge that could revolutionize Roman warfare. But accepting such aid would also mean acknowledging dependence on an ally whose motivations remained unclear. How much time would such modifications require? Caesar asked. Basic improvements to equipment and tactics could be implemented within 12 hours. Advanced modifications would require several days. And the results? The combat effectiveness would improve by approximately 43%. Casualty ratios would shift from unfavorable to decisive advantage. Tribune Antonius cleared his throat nervously. General, with respect, are we seriously considering accepting military advice from whatever this creature is? The giant's helmeted head turned toward Antonius with mechanical precision. Tribune Marcus Antonius, historical records indicate that you will eventually ally with Cleopatra of Egypt in a bid for power that will ultimately fail against Augustus Caesar. Your tactical competence is adequate for this technological level, but insufficient for complex strategic planning. The casual dismissal of Antonius's future, and implicitly his present capabilities, created immediate tension in the tent. Several officers reached for their weapons, while others simply stared in shock at the giant's breach of military courtesy. "You go too far," Antonius snarled, his hand on his gladius hilt. "I speak tactical reality based on historical analysis," the giant replied without emotion. "Personal offense is irrelevant to strategic planning." Caesar raised a hand for silence, but I could see that he was as disturbed by the giant's casual omniscience as anyone else. The creature's knowledge of future events was simultaneously valuable and terrifying, especially when those events concerned the personal fates of Caesar's officers. "Brother Sergeant," Caesar said carefully, "your knowledge of history is clearly extensive, but perhaps such information should be shared more diplomatically." "Acknowledged. I will modify communication protocols to account for primitive emotional responses." The giant's clinical description of human emotion as primitive created another stir among the staff officers, but Caesar maintained control of the situation with characteristic authority. "We will discuss tactical modifications in detail," Caesar announced. "Tribune Antonius, you will coordinate with our guest to assess feasibility of proposed improvements. All other officers will prepare for potential night operations." As the staff dispersed to carry out their orders, I remained behind with Caesar and the giant. There was clearly more to this conversation than tactical planning. "Lucius Varro," Caesar said once we were alone, "your knowledge of future events raises questions. Specify. You know how Antonius will die. You know how the Republic will end. You presumably know how Caesar will die." The giant's silence was answer enough. "And yet you continue to serve with us, knowing the ultimate futility of our struggles." "No struggle is futile if it serves the Emperor's will," the giant replied. "Your achievements will echo across 40,000 years of human history. The manner of your death is less important than the legacy of your life." Caesar smiled grimly. "You could warn me. Help me avoid whatever fate awaits. I could, but doing so might prevent the chain of events that leads to humanity's eventual unity under the Emperor's guidance. Personal survival is less important than species survival. I watched Caesar absorb this revelation with something approaching admiration. The giant was essentially confirming that Caesar would die, but offering it as a sacrifice necessary for humanity's future greatness. Then you serve something greater than any individual ruler, Caesar observed. I serve the future of the human species. Everything else is secondary. That night, as I watched Roman legionaries learning impossible new fighting techniques from a warrior out of time, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all pawns in a game whose rules we couldn't understand, played by entities whose motives transcended ordinary human ambition. But perhaps that was exactly what Caesar needed to hear. Chapter 4. Maximum Violence. Dawn came with the sound of Roman engineering that defied everything I thought I knew about military equipment. Throughout the night, our smiths had worked frantically under the giant's direction, modifying gladi with impossibly sharp edges, reinforcing shields with metallic compounds that made them light as leather but strong as stone, and creating armor improvements that turned ordinary legionaries into something approaching superhuman warriors. "By Jupiter's beard," muttered Optio Brutus as he tested his modified gladius against a bronze target. The blade sliced through the metal like it was parchment, leaving edges so clean they looked polished. "What sorcery is this?" "Applied metallurgy from the 31st millennium," Brother-Sergeant Varro replied matter-of-factly. "Molecular bonding techniques that optimize cutting efficiency while maintaining structural integrity." I hefted my own enhanced shield, marveling at how something so impossibly light could feel so solid. The giant had called the modifications basic field expedients, but they represented technological advances that human civilization wouldn't achieve for thousands of years. "Men of the 10th Legion," I addressed my sentry as they assembled in the pre-dawn darkness. "Today we fight with equipment that would make the gods themselves envious. But remember, it's not the weapon that wins battles, it's the warrior wielding it." Nods and grunts of acknowledgement came from troops who had already tested their enhanced gear during night training. The transformation was remarkable. Ordinary Roman soldiers moving with confidence and precision that bordered on supernatural. "Tactical briefing," announced Caesar as he approached our assembly area. Behind him came the giant, its massive form somehow managing to move silently across ground that crunched under normal human footsteps. Intelligence indicates that Vercingetorix has positioned his main force on the ridge overlooking the valley floor, Caesar began, gesturing toward the high ground where thousands of cooking fires marked the Gallic position. Standard Roman tactics would require frontal assault against prepared defenses, an approach that would cost us thousands of casualties. However, the giant interjected with mechanical precision, modified tactical doctrine allows for alternative approaches that minimize friendly losses while maximizing enemy casualties. Tribune Antonius, still visibly annoyed by the giant's previous assessment of his future, spoke up. "What kind of modifications?" "Coordinated night infiltration, followed by psychological disruption," the giant replied. "Small teams equipped with enhanced gear will penetrate enemy lines and eliminate key targets. When main assault begins, enemy command structure will be compromised and morale broken." I had participated in night operations before, but never anything as ambitious as what the giant was proposing. Infiltrating a camp containing 60,000 warriors seemed like suicide, regardless of equipment advantages. "How many teams?" Caesar asked. 12 units of 8 legionaries each. Modified armor will reduce noise and improve stealth capabilities. Enhanced weapons will allow for silent elimination of sentries. Tactical doctrine adapted from Astartes' reconnaissance protocols will optimize mission success probability. Casualty estimates? Infiltration phase, approximately 7%. Main assault phase, less than 3%. The numbers were almost impossible to believe. Roman military doctrine accepted casualty rates of 20 to 30% as normal for major engagements. The giant was proposing tactical modifications that would reduce our losses to nearly nothing. "I volunteer to lead one of the infiltration teams," I said, though part of me questioned the wisdom of trusting my life to alien technology I didn't understand. "Negative," the giant replied immediately. "Centurion Maximus will remain with the main force. Mission parameters require his survival for future timeline stability." The casual reference to my personal importance to history was both flattering and disturbing. But before I could ask for clarification, Caesar was already moving forward with operational planning. "Selection criteria for infiltration teams?" he asked. "Physical fitness, proven courage under fire, ability to follow complex orders without question," the giant listed. "Intelligence and adaptability are more important than combat experience for this mission type." What followed was the most intensive military briefing I had ever witnessed. The giant explained tactical concepts that wouldn't be developed for millennia, demonstrated equipment that violated known physical laws, and outlined operational procedures that treated warfare as an exact science rather than an art form. "Silent elimination techniques," the giant announced as it began instructing selected legionaries in methods of killing that left no trace. "Pressure points that cause instantaneous unconsciousness. Blade angles that penetrate armor without creating noise. Movement patterns that avoid visual detection, even in moonlight." I watched Roman soldiers, men I had trained personally in conventional warfare, learning to fight like shadows made flesh. The giant's enhanced equipment made each movement more precise, each strike more deadly, each step more silent than should have been possible. "Psychological warfare protocols," the giant continued. "Fear is a force multiplier that reduces enemy combat effectiveness exponentially. Strategic application of terror can break enemy formations before physical engagement begins. Impossible deaths, bodies found in locations that should be inaccessible, evidence of superhuman capabilities that suggests divine intervention." The giant's tone remained clinical, even while describing psychological torture. "Barbarian superstitions make them particularly vulnerable to supernatural fear." As dawn began to break over the Gallic Ridge, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about warfare. The giant was transforming Roman military doctrine from a system based on courage and discipline into something that resembled systematic murder conducted with technological superiority. "Infiltration teams deploy immediately. Primary assault begins in exactly 97 minutes. The giant checked some kind of chronometer built into its armor. "Enemy command structure will be compromised by then, and psychological preparation will be complete." I watched 12 teams of enhanced Roman soldiers disappear into the morning mist like ghosts. They moved with silence and coordination that seemed impossible for men wearing armor, no matter how advanced. Within minutes, they had vanished completely from view. But the giant was far from idle. It began moving through the remaining legions, offering tactical advice that turned ordinary soldiers into killing machines. Shield wall formations became impenetrable barriers. Pilum volleys achieved precision that defied physical possibility. Even basic gladius work was refined to levels of efficiency that bordered on artistry. "Sir," reported Tribune Antonius after an hour of this instruction, "the men are changed. They fight like they're possessed by war gods. Enhanced equipment provides improved performance parameters," the giant explained, "but tactical doctrine modifications are equally important. Your soldiers now understand warfare as a science rather than merely an art." I could see what Antonius meant. Our legionaries moved with confidence and precision that transformed them into something more than human. The giants' training hadn't just improved their skills, it had fundamentally altered their understanding of what was possible in combat. "Signal from infiltration teams," announced a messenger who had appeared seemingly from nowhere. "Primary objectives achieved. Enemy command structure compromised. Beginning psychological phase." From the Gallic Ridge came sounds that made my skin crawl. Screams of terror that echoed across the valley, like the voices of the damned. Not the normal sounds of men dying in battle, but something far worse. the cries of warriors discovering that their fundamental understanding of reality had been shattered. "Creating legend," the giant replied with satisfaction. "By tonight, every barbarian in Gaul will know that Caesar commands spirits of the dead and fights with weapons forged by gods." The psychological assault continued for another 30 minutes. Screams, horns blowing random signals, the sound of running feet as panic spread through the Gallic camp, and underneath it all, a growing sense that something impossible was happening on that ridge. "Main assault begins in 30 minutes, the giant announced. "Enemy morale is at optimal breaking point." Caesar raised his hand for the legion's attention, and 60,000 Roman soldiers focused on their commander with the discipline that had conquered the world. "Soldiers of Rome," Caesar's voice carried across the formation with practiced authority. "Today, we face an enemy that outnumbers us 3-1. They hold the high ground. They have every advantage that terrain and numbers can provide." Murmurs of acknowledgement came from the ranks. "But," Caesar continued, his voice rising, "we have advantages they cannot imagine. We fight with weapons blessed by the gods themselves. We are guided by wisdom that spans eternity, and we serve a destiny that will echo across the ages." The response was immediate and overwhelming. 60,000 voices raised in the war cry that had terrorized barbarians from Britain to Mesopotamia. "Roma Invicta." The Roman army moved forward like a machine of war given flesh. Enhanced equipment made each soldier faster, stronger, more deadly than should have been possible. Modified tactical doctrine turned the entire legion into a coordinated weapon that functioned with superhuman precision. I found myself at the front of the charge, my enhanced gladius singing through the air as we climbed toward the Gallic positions. But what we found on the ridge was not an army prepared for battle. The infiltration teams had done their work with ruthless efficiency. Gallic chieftains lay dead in their tents, killed by methods that left no trace of how the assassins had penetrated the camp's defenses. Sentries had been eliminated so silently that their bodies were discovered only when the morning watch tried to relieve them. And throughout the camp, evidence of impossible prowess had been left deliberately visible. Sword cuts through solid stone, arrows embedded in tree trunks 60 feet high, footprints burned into the earth by some unknown force. "Vercingetorix is dead," reported Centurion Crassus as his team emerged from the command tent. "Found him barricaded inside with his bodyguard. All dead, no wounds, no sign of struggle. They just stopped living." The giant's psychological warfare had worked perfectly. The remaining Gallic warriors were fleeing in panic, abandoning their weapons and equipment in their haste to escape what they obviously considered supernatural vengeance. "Total enemy casualties?" Caesar asked. "Approximately 4,000 dead or wounded," the giant calculated. "Remaining forces scattered and demoralized. Military threat neutralized with minimal Roman losses. Our casualties: 12 dead, 37 wounded. Casualty ratio of approximately 100-1 in our favor." The numbers were unprecedented in the history of Roman warfare. We had destroyed a barbarian army 3 times our size, while suffering losses that wouldn't even qualify as a minor skirmish under normal circumstances. "How?" Caesar asked. "Technological superiority combined with psychological warfare and tactical innovation," the giant replied. "Standard Astartes doctrine adapted for primitive technological base." As I surveyed the battlefield, if it could even be called that, I felt a mixture of elation and unease. We had won the most decisive victory in Roman history, but at the cost of fundamentally altering what it meant to be Roman soldiers. "The men," I said to Caesar, "they're different. This isn't just better equipment. They've been changed." Caesar nodded grimly. "I've noticed. They fight like they're no longer entirely human. Enhanced physical capabilities, improved tactical awareness, modified psychological responses to combat stress," the giant listed clinically. "Standard augmentation protocols for non-Astartes human forces." I looked at my men, legionaries who had served with me for years, and saw strangers wearing familiar faces. They moved with confidence that bordered on arrogance, spoke with casual certainty about tactical matters that would have puzzled veteran centurions, and showed no trace of the normal human responses to having just participated in wholesale slaughter. "What have you done to them?" I demanded. "I have given them a glimpse of what humanity can become," the giant replied. "Enhanced, optimized, perfected for the purpose they serve. This is the future that awaits your species, Centurion. This is what the Emperor's gift will make possible." Caesar was studying the giant with the calculating gaze of a politician who had just realized he was dealing with something far more complex than a simple military advisor. "You didn't just modify our equipment," Caesar said slowly. "You modified us. You've turned my legions into a weapon designed according to your specifications." "Correct. And that weapon has just won you the most decisive victory in Roman military history. The cost," the giant said with mechanical certainty, "is learning to accept that some changes are inevitable. Humanity's future requires enhancement beyond current biological limitations. This was merely a demonstration of what becomes possible when those limitations are removed." Chapter 5. Tactical Victory. 3 hours after the battle that wasn't really a battle, I sat in Caesar's command tent watching my general interrogate a warrior from 40,000 years in the future while trying to understand what my soldiers had become. The enhanced modifications the giant had provided were indeed temporary, but their effects lingered in ways that defied simple explanation. My legionaries moved with fluid precision, spoke with technical vocabulary they had never learned, and demonstrated tactical insights that seemed to come from somewhere beyond their normal experience. "Legionary Marcus Quintus," I called to one of my men who was methodically cleaning his enhanced gladius. "Report on enemy tactics observed during the assault." "Sir," he replied with confidence that seemed borrowed from someone else. "The barbarians employed standard Celtic mass charge doctrine, modified for defensive terrain advantage. Their psychological profile indicated heavy reliance on individual warrior courage rather than coordinated unit tactics. Disruption of command structure created cascade failure throughout their formation coherence matrix." I stared at the soldier, trying to reconcile the technical analysis with the simple farmer from Latium who had joined my century 2 years earlier. Quintus had never used words like formation coherence matrix in his life, but now he spoke them as if they were natural parts of his vocabulary. "Centurion," came Caesar's voice from across the tent. "Join us. Our guest has been explaining the theoretical foundations of military enhancement." I approached the map table, where Caesar and the giant were engaged in what appeared to be an academic discussion about warfare. But as I drew closer, I realized the conversation was far more ominous than it initially seemed. "The process is called bio-augmentation," the giant was explaining with clinical detachment. "Temporary chemical modification of neural pathways to optimize cognitive function for specific tasks. In this case, tactical analysis and combat effectiveness." "And the long-term effects?" Caesar asked. "For limited exposure, negligible. However, repeated applications would result in permanent alteration of brain chemistry and psychological profile." The giant paused, as if considering the implications of what it was saying. "Extended use of enhancement protocols typically produces individuals who are functionally superior to baseline humans, but psychologically incompatible with non-enhanced populations." I felt my blood turn cold as understanding dawned. "You're saying that repeated use of these modifications would make my men incapable of normal human relationships?" "Essentially, yes. Enhanced individuals tend to view non-enhanced humans as limited. This perspective makes standard social interaction difficult and often leads to isolation from mainstream society." Caesar leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "And in your time, this is common practice? Standard procedure for human auxiliary forces serving alongside Astartes units. The performance improvement justifies the social cost." "Social cost," Caesar repeated slowly. "You speak of fundamentally altering human nature as if it were a routine logistics consideration. In terms of military effectiveness, it is. The giant's tone remained matter-of-fact, despite discussing what amounted to the systematic dehumanization of soldiers. Enhanced humans perform their duties more efficiently than baseline humans. Emotional attachments and social connections that interfere with mission objectives are counterproductive. I thought about my own men, legionaries who had families in Rome, friends in the ranks, personal interests and individual quirks that made them human beings rather than just military assets. The idea of systematically removing those qualities in the name of effectiveness was simultaneously appealing and horrifying. "Sir," I said to Caesar, "permission to speak freely." "Granted. This creature is offering us the power to create invincible armies at the cost of destroying the humanity of our soldiers. It's asking us to trade Roman virtues for alien efficiency." "An oversimplification," the giant replied before Caesar could respond. "The modifications enhance existing human capabilities rather than replacing them. Courage becomes more focused. Intelligence becomes more tactical. Loyalty becomes more absolute. And what about compassion? What about mercy? What about the qualities that make victory meaningful rather than just statistical success?" The giant's helmeted head turned toward me with mechanical precision. "Such qualities are luxuries that civilizations can afford only when they face no existential threats. Humanity in my era is surrounded by enemies that would exterminate our species without hesitation. Survival requires optimization of all available resources, including human potential. But at what point do we stop being the civilization we're trying to protect?" Caesar asked quietly. "When the alternative is extinction," the giant replied immediately. "Philosophical concerns about human nature become irrelevant if there are no humans left to possess that nature." I found myself caught between the logical necessity of the giant's argument and the fundamental wrongness of what it was proposing. Enhanced soldiers were undeniably more effective, but they were also something other than the Romans who had originally volunteered to serve. "Show me the full extent of what these modifications can accomplish," Caesar commanded. "Inadvisable," the giant replied. "Full bio-augmentation protocols require medical facilities and genetic modification techniques not available in this era. Attempting advanced enhancement with primitive resources could result in psychological fragmentation or cellular breakdown. But it's possible. Theoretically. However, the risk-to-benefit ratio would be unacceptable for anything except emergency circumstances." Caesar studied the giant with the calculating gaze of a man weighing impossible options. "Define emergency circumstances. Existential threat to human survival. Invasion by superior alien forces. Catastrophic breakdown of planetary defense systems." The giant paused. "Or temporal anomalies that threaten the stability of critical historical events." The implication was clear. The giant considered its own presence in our time period to be potentially catastrophic, requiring emergency measures to prevent unknown consequences. "You believe your arrival here has created such an emergency?" I asked. "Unknown, but probability analysis suggests that significant temporal displacement could create cascade effects throughout the timeline. If my presence prevents necessary historical developments, emergency intervention may be required to preserve species survival." Caesar leaned forward with interest. "What kind of intervention?" "Accelerated technological development, enhanced human capabilities, modified historical outcomes to compensate for temporal contamination." The giant's tone carried the weight of enormous responsibility. "If necessary, temporary establishment of protectorate status to ensure proper timeline progression." The casual mention of making Rome into some kind of alien protectorate sent chills through me. The giant was discussing the possibility of conquering our civilization for its own good, and treating it as a routine contingency plan. "You would subjugate us to preserve your future?" Caesar asked. "I would ensure human survival by any means necessary," the giant replied. "Subjugation is preferable to extinction." "And who decides when such measures become necessary?" "I do, based on tactical assessment of temporal stability and threat evaluation protocols." The tent fell silent as Caesar and I absorbed the implications of what we had just heard. Our impossible ally was also our potential conqueror, operating according to criteria we couldn't understand to serve objectives that transcended normal human concerns. "There is another possibility," Caesar said slowly. "Specify. Cooperation. Rather than subjugation or abandonment, we could work together to achieve your objectives while preserving Roman independence." "Elaborate." Caesar stood and began pacing, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. "You need to ensure that history proceeds according to patterns that produce your future imperium. We need to protect and expand Roman power. These objectives are not necessarily incompatible." "Continue." "You provide technological and tactical advantages that make Roman conquest more efficient and complete. We provide the political and military framework for human unification that your emperor will eventually require." Caesar's voice gained enthusiasm as he developed his argument. "Instead of viewing your presence as temporal contamination, we treat it as an acceleration of inevitable processes." The giant was silent for a long moment, its glowing lenses seeming to process vast amounts of information. When it spoke, there was something approaching approval in its mechanical tone. "The proposal has merit. Roman governmental and military structures do provide foundational elements for later imperial development. Accelerated expansion could compensate for temporal displacement effects." "What would such cooperation require?" I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. "Modified conquest strategy, enhanced Roman capabilities, systematic elimination of potential threats to long-term stability." The giant listed requirements with clinical precision, and acceptance that some traditional Roman values may need to be adapted to serve larger purposes, such as mercy toward defeated enemies becomes selective rather than universal. Cultural preservation gives way to efficient administration. Individual autonomy yields to collective optimization. I could see the outline of what the giant was proposing: the gradual transformation of Roman civilization into something that served the requirements of a future we couldn't fully understand. We would remain Romans in name, but our essential character would be systematically altered to meet alien specifications. "The alternative?" Caesar asked. "Temporal cascade failure resulting in the prevention of human unity under the emperor's guidance. Multiple species extinction events. Galactic conquest by hostile alien civilizations." The giant's tone carried absolute certainty. Total extinction of human consciousness within approximately 10,000 years. Caesar walked to the tent entrance and looked out at the Roman camp, where enhanced legionaries were going about their duties with mechanical efficiency that somehow seemed less human than it had that morning. "Centurion Maximus," he said without turning around. "Your assessment." I looked at the giant, whose imposing presence dominated the tent like a monument to impossible possibilities. Then I looked at Caesar, whose decisions in the next few minutes could determine the course of human history for 40,000 years. "Sir," I said finally, "I think we're being offered a choice between remaining human and ensuring humanity's survival, and I don't think those are the same thing." Caesar nodded slowly. "But which is more important, preserving what we are or ensuring that something remains to remember what we were? That," said the giant with something approaching satisfaction, "is the correct question." Outside the tent, enhanced Roman soldiers continued their duties, while the fate of human civilization hung in the balance of an impossible conversation between a general who would never see the consequences of his decisions and a warrior who could never escape the responsibility for ensuring those consequences led to the right future. Time itself held its breath as Caesar prepared to choose between humanity and survival. 3 hours after the battle, that wasn't really a battle. I sat in Caesar's command tent watching my general interrogate a warrior from 40,000 years in the future, while trying to understand what my soldiers had become. The enhanced modifications the giant had provided were indeed temporary, but their effects lingered in ways that defied simple explanation. My legionaries moved with fluid precision, spoke with technical vocabulary they had never learned, and demonstrated tactical insights that seemed to come from somewhere beyond their normal experience. "Legionary Marcus Quintus," I called to one of my men who was methodically cleaning his enhanced gladius. Report on enemy tactics observed during the assault. Sir, he replied with confidence that seemed borrowed from someone else. The barbarians employed standard Celtic mass charge doctrine, modified for defensive terrain advantage. Their psychological profile indicated heavy reliance on individual warrior courage rather than coordinated unit tactics. Disruption of command structure created cascade failure throughout their formation coherence matrix. I stared at the soldier, trying to reconcile the technical analysis with the simple farmer from Latium who had joined my century 2 years earlier. Quintus had never used words like formation coherence matrix in his life, but now he spoke them as if they were natural parts of his vocabulary. Centurion, came Caesar's voice from across the tent. Join us. Our guest has been explaining the theoretical foundations of military enhancement. I approached the map table, where Caesar and the giant were engaged in what appeared to be an academic discussion about warfare. But as I drew closer, I realized the conversation was far more ominous than it initially seemed. The process is called bio-augmentation, the giant was explaining with clinical detachment. Temporary chemical modification of neural pathways to optimize cognitive function for specific tasks. In this case, tactical analysis and combat effectiveness. And the long-term effects? Caesar asked. For limited exposure, negligible. However, repeated applications would result in permanent alteration of brain chemistry and psychological profile. The giant paused, as if considering the implications of what it was saying. Extended use of enhancement protocols typically produces individuals who are functionally superior to baseline humans, but psychologically incompatible with non-enhanced populations. I felt my blood turn cold as understanding dawned. You're saying that repeated use of these modifications would make my men incapable of normal human relationships? Essentially, yes. Enhanced individuals tend to view non-enhanced humans as limited. This perspective makes standard social interaction difficult and often leads to isolation from mainstream society. Caesar leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. And in your time, this is common practice? Standard procedure for human auxiliary forces serving alongside Astartes units. The performance improvement justifies the social cost. Social cost, Caesar repeated slowly. You speak of fundamentally altering human nature as if it were a routine logistics consideration. In terms of military effectiveness, it is. The giant's tone remained matter-of-fact, despite discussing what amounted to the systematic dehumanization of soldiers. Enhanced humans perform their duties more efficiently than baseline humans. Emotional attachments and social connections that interfere with mission objectives are counterproductive. I thought about my own men, legionaries who had families in Rome, friends in the ranks, personal interests and individual quirks that made them human beings rather than just military assets. The idea of systematically removing those qualities in the name of effectiveness was simultaneously appealing and horrifying. Sir, I said to Caesar, permission to speak freely. Granted. This creature is offering us the power to create invincible armies at the cost of destroying the humanity of our soldiers. It's asking us to trade Roman virtues for alien efficiency. An oversimplification, the giant replied before Caesar could respond. The modifications enhance existing human capabilities rather than replacing them. Courage becomes more focused. Intelligence becomes more tactical. Loyalty becomes more absolute. And what about compassion? What about mercy? What about the qualities that make victory meaningful rather than just statistical success? The giant's helmeted head turned toward me with mechanical precision. Such qualities are luxuries that civilizations can afford only when they face no existential threats. Humanity in my era is surrounded by enemies that would exterminate our species without hesitation. Survival requires optimization of all available resources, including human potential. But at what point do we stop being the civilization we're trying to protect? Caesar asked quietly. When the alternative is extinction, the giant replied immediately. Philosophical concerns about human nature become irrelevant if there are no humans left to possess that nature. I found myself caught between the logical necessity of the giant's argument and the fundamental wrongness of what it was proposing. Enhanced soldiers were undeniably more effective, but they were also something other than the Romans who had originally volunteered to serve. "Show me the full extent of what these modifications can accomplish," Caesar commanded. "Inadvisable," the giant replied. "Full bioaugmentation protocols require medical facilities and genetic modification techniques not available in this era. Attempting advanced enhancement with primitive resources could result in psychological fragmentation or cellular breakdown. But it's possible? Theoretically. However, the risk-to-benefit ratio would be unacceptable for anything except emergency circumstances." Caesar studied the giant with the calculating gaze of a man weighing impossible options. "Define emergency circumstances. Existential threat to human survival. Invasion by superior alien forces. Catastrophic breakdown of planetary defense systems." The giant paused. "Or temporal anomalies that threaten the stability of critical historical events." The implication was clear. The giant considered its own presence in our time period to be potentially catastrophic, requiring emergency measures to prevent unknown consequences. "You believe your arrival here has created such an emergency?" I asked. "Unknown, but probability analysis suggests that significant temporal displacement could create cascade effects throughout the timeline. If my presence prevents necessary historical developments, emergency intervention may be required to preserve species survival." Caesar leaned forward with interest. "What kind of intervention?" "Accelerated technological development, enhanced human capabilities, modified historical outcomes to compensate for temporal contamination." The giant's tone carried the weight of enormous responsibility. "If necessary, temporary establishment of protectorate status to ensure proper timeline progression." The casual mention of making Rome into some kind of alien protectorate sent chills through me. The giant was discussing the possibility of conquering our civilization for its own good and treating it as a routine contingency plan. "You would subjugate us to preserve your future?" Caesar asked. "I would ensure human survival by any means necessary," the giant replied. "Subjugation is preferable to extinction." "And who decides when such measures become necessary?" "I do, based on tactical assessment of temporal stability and threat evaluation protocols." The tent fell silent as Caesar and I absorbed the implications of what we had just heard. Our impossible ally was also our potential conqueror, operating according to criteria. We couldn't understand to serve objectives that transcended normal human concerns. "There is another possibility," Caesar said slowly. "Specify." "Cooperation. Rather than subjugation or abandonment, we could work together to achieve your objectives while preserving Roman independence." "Elaborate." Caesar stood and began pacing, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. "You need to ensure that history proceeds according to patterns that produce your future imperium. We need to protect and expand Roman power. These objectives are not necessarily incompatible." Continue. "You provide technological and tactical advantages that make Roman conquest more efficient and complete. We provide the political and military framework for human unification that your emperor will eventually require." Caesar's voice gained enthusiasm as he developed his argument. "Instead of viewing your presence as temporal contamination, we treat it as an acceleration of inevitable processes." The giant was silent for a long moment, its glowing lenses seeming to process vast amounts of information. When it spoke, there was something approaching approval in its mechanical tone. "The proposal has merit. Roman governmental and military structures do provide foundational elements for later imperial development. Accelerated expansion could compensate for temporal displacement effects." "What would such cooperation require?" I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. "Modified conquest strategy, enhanced Roman capabilities, systematic elimination of potential threats to long-term stability." The giant listed requirements with clinical precision. and acceptance that some traditional Roman values may need to be adapted to serve larger purposes, such as mercy toward defeated enemies becomes selective rather than universal. Cultural preservation gives way to efficient administration. Individual autonomy yields to collective optimization. I could see the outline of what the giant was proposing, the gradual transformation of Roman civilization into something that served the requirements of a future we couldn't fully understand. We would remain Romans in name, but our essential character would be systematically altered to meet alien specifications. The alternative, Caesar asked? Temporal cascade failure resulting in the prevention of human unity under the Emperor's guidance. Multiple species extinction events. Galactic conquest by hostile alien civilizations. The giant's tone carried absolute certainty. Total extinction of human consciousness within approximately 10,000 years. Caesar walked to the tent entrance and looked out at the Roman camp, where enhanced legionaries were going about their duties with mechanical efficiency that somehow seemed less human than it had that morning. "Centurion Maximus," he said, without turning around, "your assessment." I looked at the giant, whose imposing presence dominated the tent like a monument to impossible possibilities. Then I looked at Caesar, whose decisions in the next few minutes could determine the course of human history for 40,000 years. "Sir," I said finally, "I think we're being offered a choice between remaining human and ensuring humanity's survival, and I don't think those are the same thing." Caesar nodded slowly. "But which is more important? Preserving what we are, or ensuring that something remains to remember what we were?" "That," said the giant with something approaching satisfaction, "is the correct question." Outside the tent, enhanced Roman soldiers continued their duties, while the fate of human civilization hung in the balance of an impossible conversation between a general who would never see the consequences of his decisions and a warrior who could never escape the responsibility for ensuring those consequences led to the right future. Time itself held its breath as Caesar prepared to choose between humanity and survival. Chapter 6. Hard Lessons. The choice came sooner than expected, delivered by a blood-soaked messenger who collapsed at Caesar's feet as the afternoon sun reached its zenith. Germania had exploded into revolt. Arminius had united the tribes beyond the Rhine. And worst of all, our northern legions had been ambushed and destroyed in the Teutoburg forest. 20,000 dead, the messenger gasped as our medicus worked to staunch the wounds that had nearly killed him during his desperate ride south. 3 entire legions. The Eagles are lost. I felt the words hit me like a physical blow. The loss of Legion Eagles was more than military defeat. It was spiritual catastrophe that struck at the heart of Roman identity. No eagle had been lost to barbarians since the disaster at Cari, and now 3 had been captured in a single battle. Caesar's face remained impassive as he processed the intelligence, but I could see calculation racing behind his eyes. The Germanic revolt threatened everything we had achieved in Gaul, and without immediate intervention, it could spread to every barbarian tribe from the Atlantic to the Black Sea. "Timeline analysis confirms the crisis," Brother-Sergeant Varro announced, without being asked. Its glowing lenses seemed to process information that existed beyond our immediate surroundings. Germanic unification represents a significant deviation from optimal historical progression. Immediate intervention is required to prevent cascade failure. "You knew this was coming," Caesar accused. "I calculated the probability based on temporal displacement effects. My presence has accelerated certain historical processes while disrupting others. The Germanic revolt is a direct consequence of dimensional contamination." I stared at the giant, trying to understand the implications of what it was saying. "You caused this." "Indirectly. My arrival has created temporal echoes that have reached sensitive individuals across the region. Arminius possesses latent psychic sensitivity that has been activated by exposure to chronological distortion fields. Meaning, he can perceive fragments of potential futures where Germanic tribes unite to destroy Roman expansion. That knowledge is driving his strategic decisions." Caesar stood and began pacing with the controlled energy of a commander facing an impossible tactical situation. Can this sensitivity be countered? Yes, but intervention would require direct application of advanced technologies and modification of key individuals throughout the Germanic tribal structure. The giant paused. Such intervention would represent massive historical contamination with unpredictable long-term consequences. Alternative options? Conventional military response using enhanced Roman capabilities, systematic elimination of tribal leadership, accelerated conquest and pacification of all Germanic territories. I could see where this conversation was heading, and it filled me with dread. The giant was proposing to solve the problem it had created by turning the Roman legions into an unstoppable force of conquest that would reshape the ancient world according to specifications from the far future. What would enhanced Roman capabilities entail? Caesar asked. Full bio-augmentation for selected military units, advanced weapons technology adapted for contemporary manufacturing capabilities, tactical doctrine based on Astartes protocols for hostile planet pacification. The social cost? I interjected, remembering our earlier conversation about what repeated enhancement did to soldiers. Acceptable, given the strategic necessity. Enhanced legionaries would become permanently optimized for warfare, but this modification would be limited to volunteer units specifically designated for frontier expansion. Caesar studied the tactical map that dominated one wall of the tent, his finger tracing potential campaign routes into Germanic territory. How many enhanced soldiers would be required? 12,000 legionaries modified for special operations, supported by conventional forces using advanced equipment. Total force requirements, approximately 60,000 troops. Casualties? Enhanced units, less than 5%. Conventional units, approximately 15%. Enemy casualties would approach 100%. The numbers were staggering. The giant was proposing a campaign of such efficiency that it would amount to systematic extermination of Germanic resistance. But it was also offering to preserve Roman lives at a rate that made such a campaign almost irresistible from a commander's perspective. Sir, I said carefully, we're discussing the permanent alteration of 12,000 Roman citizens and the genocide of an entire tribal confederation. I'm discussing the preservation of human civilization, Caesar replied grimly. If this Germanic revolt spreads, it could undo everything Rome has accomplished. Worse, if our guest is correct about temporal consequences, it could prevent the eventual unification of humanity under imperial rule. And if we proceed as the giant suggests? Then 12,000 volunteers become something more than human to ensure that humanity has a future worth protecting. I looked at the giant, whose massive presence seemed to loom over our entire conversation. Brother Sergeant, would you undergo this modification yourself if you were in our position? I have already undergone far more extensive modification than what I am proposing for your forces. Astartes enhancement involves complete genetic restructuring, psychological conditioning, and cybernetic augmentation. What I suggest for Roman legionaries is minimal by comparison, but irreversible. For individuals receiving full bio-augmentation, yes, enhanced soldiers would be incapable of returning to normal human society. However, they would also be incapable of failing in their mission to protect that society. Caesar stopped pacing and turned to face both of us. Centurion Maximus, I need your honest assessment. Can Rome survive this crisis using conventional methods? I considered the question with the ruthless objectivity that 20 years of military service had taught me. Germania United could field over 200,000 warriors. Our northern legions were destroyed. The Gallic tribes might view Germanic success as an opportunity for renewed rebellion. And if the revolt spread to Britannia or Hispania? No, sir, I said finally. Not without accepting losses that would cripple the Republic for generations. And with enhanced capabilities, we would win, decisively and permanently. I paused, but the cost would be paid by volunteers who understand what they're accepting, Caesar finished. Soldiers who choose enhanced capability over normal human limitation. The giant interjected with mechanical precision. Volunteer protocols can be established that ensure informed consent. Enhanced individuals would understand both the benefits and consequences of bio-augmentation before accepting modification. What kind of consequences? I asked. Permanently altered psychology. Inability to relate to non-enhanced humans on an emotional level. Absolute loyalty to mission objectives, superseding personal relationships. Enhanced aggression and tactical thinking, combined with reduced empathy and social bonding. The clinical description made enhanced soldiers sound like sophisticated weapons that happened to be housed in human bodies. But given the alternative, watching Roman civilization collapse under barbarian assault, it was beginning to seem like the only viable option. I need to see the full extent of what you're proposing, Caesar decided. Demonstrate complete enhancement protocols on a volunteer subject. Sir, I said immediately, I volunteer. Negative, the giant replied before Caesar could respond. Centurion Maximus is required for future timeline stability. Alternative subjects must be selected. What does that mean? Caesar demanded. Historical analysis indicates that Marcus Flavius Maximus plays a crucial role in events that occur after the Germanic campaigns. His survival and psychological stability are essential to maintaining proper temporal progression. I felt the familiar chill of having my personal future discussed by entities operating on scales I couldn't understand. What role? Classified at current clearance level. Sufficient to say that your decisions during the next several years will have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate military situation. Caesar studied me with calculating interest. It seems that both you and I have destinies that extend beyond our normal understanding, Centurion. Sir, with respect, I don't want a destiny. I want to serve Rome to the best of my abilities and retire to a small farm in Latium. Unfortunately, the giant observed, individual preferences are irrelevant when balanced against species' survival requirements. Both you and Caesar will serve purposes larger than your personal ambitions. The casual dismissal of our individual agency was both infuriating and oddly liberating. If our fates were predetermined by historical necessity, then at least the burden of choice was lifted from our shoulders. Very well, Caesar announced. We proceed with enhanced capability development, but I select the volunteer for the demonstration. Acceptable. Who do you choose? Caesar smiled with the confidence of a man who had just found the perfect solution to an impossible problem. Tribune Marcus Antonius. He volunteered for the infiltration mission earlier and has consistently advocated for aggressive tactics. If anyone can handle enhancement without losing his essential character, it's Antonius. I thought about Antonius. Proud, ambitious, loyal to Caesar, but ultimately driven by personal glory rather than abstract principles. He was exactly the kind of officer who would embrace enhancement if it gave him advantages over his competitors. The selection is acceptable, the giant confirmed. Tribune Antonius possesses the psychological profile that typically adapts well to bio-augmentation protocols. Shall I summon him for briefing? Do it, Caesar commanded. As we waited for Antonius to arrive, I found myself wondering if we were about to witness the birth of something new in human history, the first of a new breed of warriors who would reshape the world according to visions from the distant future, or if we were about to watch a good Roman officer become something that was no longer recognizably human. Either way, I suspected that after today, nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 7. Battle-forged Tribune. Marcus Antonius emerged from the enhancement chamber 3 hours later as something that retained his face but had become fundamentally alien in every other respect. The process had been brutal to witness. Even through the steel doors of the medical tent, we could hear sounds that suggested Antonius was being taken apart and reassembled at the cellular level. Status report, Caesar commanded as the giant sealed the chamber behind them. Bio-augmentation complete, Brother-Sergeant Varro replied with clinical satisfaction. Physical capabilities enhanced by approximately 340%. Cognitive processing improved by 280%. Psychological modifications successful with minimal identity degradation. I studied Antonius as he stood before us, trying to catalogue the changes that were immediately visible. He was still recognizably himself, but somehow more, taller, broader, moving with mechanical precision that made ordinary human motion seem clumsy by comparison. His eyes held intelligence that seemed to operate on multiple levels simultaneously. "How do you feel, Tribune?" Caesar asked. "Enhanced," Antonius replied, though his voice now carried harmonics that seemed to resonate inside my skull. "I can perceive tactical situations with clarity that was previously impossible. Strategic variables that once required careful analysis are now immediately apparent." "Demonstrate," Caesar commanded. Antonius turned toward the camp outside, his enhanced senses apparently processing information from sources I couldn't detect. "Gallic prisoners in Compound 7 are planning escape attempt tonight during the third watch. Germanic scout force of 47 warriors is positioned 3 miles northeast, observing our dispositions for intelligence gathering. And..." He paused, his head tilting as if listening to sounds beyond normal human hearing. "Cleopatra of Egypt is approaching from the south with a diplomatic convoy, approximately 6 hours away." I stared at him, trying to understand how anyone could possibly know such specific information without supernatural aid. How can you detect things that are miles away? Enhanced sensory processing allows for interpretation of audio signatures, electromagnetic emanations, and probabilistic analysis of human behavior patterns, Antonius explained matter-of-factly. What appears to be supernatural awareness is actually applied science operating at levels beyond baseline human capability. Caesar leaned forward with interest. "You can predict human behavior? Within statistical parameters, yes. Enhanced cognitive function includes pattern recognition capabilities that allow for accurate probability assessment of individual and group actions." "And your loyalty? Do you still serve Rome?" "I serve the optimal future for human civilization," Antonius replied without hesitation. "Rome represents the most efficient path toward that future. Therefore, my loyalty to Rome is absolute. However, should Roman interests conflict with species survival, I would prioritize species survival." The clinical way he discussed potentially betraying Rome sent chills through me. Enhanced Antonius was undeniably more capable than his original self, but he was also something that might sacrifice everything I held dear for abstract principles I didn't understand. "The psychological changes are more extensive than you initially indicated," Caesar observed to the giant. "Enhanced individuals develop perspective that transcends normal human limitations," the giant agreed. "They begin to think in terms of centuries rather than years, species rather than nations, optimal outcomes rather than personal preferences." "And this is desirable?" "For military effectiveness and strategic planning, yes. Enhanced humans make decisions based on objective analysis rather than emotional attachment. They serve larger purposes with perfect dedication." I watched Antonius as the conversation continued, noting how he stood with parade ground precision but somehow seemed disconnected from the immediate situation. His attention was clearly focused on processing information streams that I couldn't perceive, calculating possibilities that existed beyond my comprehension. "Tribune," I said, testing his response. "Do you remember your family in Rome?" "I retain all previous memories," he replied promptly. "However, emotional attachment to specific individuals has been recalibrated to serve broader strategic objectives. Personal relationships are now evaluated in terms of their contribution to mission success. Your wife, your children, are important to me insofar as their welfare contributes to Roman stability and my own operational effectiveness." His tone remained perfectly level. "Excessive emotional investment in individual relationships would compromise my ability to make necessary tactical decisions." Caesar and I exchanged glances. Enhanced Antonius was describing his family as strategic assets rather than loved ones, and he seemed to consider this an improvement rather than a loss. "How many soldiers would you require for the Germanic campaign?" Caesar asked. 12,000 enhanced legionaries supported by 40,000 conventional forces, Antonius replied immediately. Enhanced units would conduct specialized operations while conventional forces maintained territorial control and supply lines. "Casualties?" Enhanced forces, less than 3%. Conventional forces, approximately 8%. Complete Germanic pacification achievable within 18 months. The confidence with which he presented these estimates was both reassuring and disturbing. Enhanced Antonius spoke with the certainty of someone who could calculate battle outcomes as precisely as an engineer calculated structural loads. And after Germania, Caesar pressed, what other threats require attention? Britannia requires systematic conquest and pacification. The Parthian Empire represents a potential long-term threat that should be neutralized. Egyptian autonomy needs to be eliminated to secure Mediterranean supply lines. Antonius listed strategic objectives as if reading from a tactical manual. Complete Mediterranean unification achievable within 30 years using enhanced military capabilities. You're proposing to conquer the known world, I said. I'm proposing to optimize human territorial control for maximum strategic advantage, Antonius corrected. Fragmented political entities represent inefficiencies that compromise species survival. Unified administration under Roman authority would eliminate those inefficiencies. Caesar stood and walked to the tent entrance, looking out at the camp where normal Roman soldiers went about their duties. Brother-Sergeant, he said without turning around, how many enhanced soldiers would be required to maintain control over a unified Mediterranean empire? Approximately 50,000, supported by conventional forces in a 10-to-1 ratio, the giant calculated. Enhanced individuals would serve as officers, specialists, and elite units, while baseline humans provided standard military and administrative functions. A new aristocracy, Caesar mused. Enhanced humans ruling over normal ones. An optimized command structure, the giant corrected. Superior individuals directing the activities of inferior ones for mutual benefit. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach as implications of what they were discussing became clear. We were talking about the systematic creation of a superhuman ruling class that would govern normal humans like a shepherd manages sheep. Sir, I said carefully, we're discussing the end of the Republic. Enhanced soldiers couldn't coexist with normal political institutions. Correct, Antonius agreed promptly. Democratic governance is inefficient when optimal decisions can be calculated objectively. Enhanced leadership would eliminate the need for political debate and popular consensus, and the rights of citizens. Would be optimized for maximum collective benefit, rather than individual preference, Antonius explained with mechanical patience. Citizens would receive optimal care and protection in exchange for accepting optimal governance. Caesar turned back to face us, his expression troubled. You're describing a system where human beings become livestock, managed by superhuman shepherds. I'm describing a system where human potential is maximized through scientific management, Antonius corrected. Baseline humans would be healthier, safer, and more productive under enhanced leadership than they could ever be under primitive democratic institutions. The argument was logically sound and completely horrifying. Enhanced humans could undoubtedly provide better governance than normal political processes, but the cost would be the elimination of everything that made human civilization worthwhile. What do you think, Centurion? Caesar asked. Is this the future we want to create? I looked at Antonius, a man I had served with for 5 years, now transformed into something that spoke about human beings as production units to be optimized. Then I looked at the giant, whose presence had initiated this entire conversation about humanity's future. Sir, I said finally, I think we're being offered a choice between surviving as a species and remaining human, and I'm not sure those are compatible goals. The preservation of human biological existence is more important than the preservation of human cultural preferences, Antonius stated with absolute certainty. Cultural adaptation is a requirement for species survival in a hostile universe. And if we refuse, Caesar asked the giant, then Germania falls to barbarian confederation. Roman expansion halts. Human political unification is delayed by approximately 15,000 years, and humanity remains vulnerable to existential threats that could have been prevented through early optimization. Caesar was quiet for a long moment. weighing impossible options with the same methodical analysis he brought to all strategic decisions. Finally, he spoke. We proceed with limited enhancement, 12,000 volunteers for the Germanic campaign. But, he raised a hand to forestall the giant's response. The enhanced units remain under conventional command authority. No political modifications, no governmental changes. Enhanced soldiers serve Rome, not the other way around. That arrangement would be suboptimal, the giant observed, but it would preserve human agency while providing the military capabilities necessary to ensure survival. Caesar replied firmly. We enhance our soldiers, but we remain Roman. Acceptable, Antonius said, though his tone suggested he considered it a temporary compromise. Enhanced forces will operate within existing command structures until strategic situation requires reassessment. As I listened to them finalize plans that would fundamentally alter the course of human history, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making deals with entities whose true agenda remained hidden behind claims of species protection. But perhaps that was exactly what survival required. The willingness to bargain with the future for the chance to see tomorrow, even if tomorrow looked nothing like the world we knew.